The first time I realized he'd made it, I was sitting on my couch in the dark. The TV screen was cracked, the sound half broken, but there he was, Noah, under the stage lights, smiling that same crooked smile I used to kiss between songs. The crowd was chanting his name, holding up their phones, faces glowing like he belonged to them now. My phone buzzed every few seconds with notifications I didn't want to open. People tagging me in his videos, sending messages that started with, "Hey, isn't this your ex?" I just sat there, a bowl of cold mac and cheese in my lap, watching him thank his day ones. He didn't mean me. That moment, that quiet, gut-deep kind of heartbreak, it doesn't come with tears. It comes with stillness. The kind where your body forgets what to do next. A few years earlier I thought I was doing something brave. I thought I was choosing love over fear, faith over logic. But looking back now, I think I was just terrified of being left behind. I was 21, studying communications at a state college in Ohio. I wasn't failing, but I wasn't living either. I just existed, drifting through lectures and deadlines, trying to convince myself I was building toward something. Then Noah showed up. He wasn't even supposed to be at that coffee shop open mic. His friend had canceled and he'd filled in last minute. I remember the way his voice cracked in the middle of a song. Not perfectly but beautifully, like he'd meant to break there. Everyone clapped politely, but my hands were trembling. Something about him felt like gravity. After his set, he came up to me, smelling like cedarwood and smoke, and said, "You look like someone who believes in things." I laughed, nervous, flattered, unsure, and he grinned like he'd already gotten what he came for. Within a week we were inseparable. Late-night drives, cheap takeout, dreams so big they barely fit in conversation. He used to call me his calm, and for a while I believed him. But calm isn't love. It's what you give to someone who's already made you small enough to carry. When he told me he wanted to drop out of college and move to Nashville, he said it like an apology. We were sitting in a booth at a diner just off campus, his hand tracing circles on a napkin. He looked at me with those wild, restless eyes and said, "I can't do this halfway anymore. I either chase it or regret it forever." And without even thinking I said, "Then chase it." He hesitated, then asked, "Come with me?" That was all it took. One question. One heartbeat. One irreversible yes. I told my parents it was temporary, a break, a semester off. I told myself it was love. But what I was really doing was erasing myself piece by piece, believing that if he made it, somehow we both would. Nashville wasn't the dream I imagined. The city hummed with ambition, neon lights, cigarette smoke, the echo of music spilling from every bar downtown. But we weren't part of that world. Not yet. We were two broke kids sharing a one-bedroom apartment that smelled like mildew and leftover takeout, trying to convince ourselves that struggle meant destiny. I got a job waitressing at a diner off Nolensville Pike. The tips barely covered rent, but I smiled like it didn't matter. Every night I'd come home with aching feet and oil on my skin, and Noah would be sitting on the floor with his guitar, writing lyrics on the back of receipts. He'd look up at me, eyes shining, and say, "You're doing this with me, Em. You're part of it." I wanted so badly to believe that my exhaustion meant something. That love was enough to keep us both afloat. There were good nights too. The kind that make you forget how hard everything is. We'd sit on the floor when the power went out, light candles, and sing half-finished songs. He'd rest his head on my lap and say, "When I make it big, I'm buying you a house with real walls." I'd laugh, pretending I didn't hear the I instead of we. Back then it didn't scare me. It just sounded like hope. But hope can turn sour without you noticing. It rots slow. The first time I saw the distance forming between us, it was during one of his gigs. He was playing at a bar downtown. Louder crowd, brighter lights. I stood near the back, invisible in a sea of strangers, watching him perform like he'd been born for that stage. When he finished, the applause felt endless. And then she appeared, a girl in a red dress, confident, magnetic. She leaned in close to whisper something in his ear. He laughed, that familiar low laugh that used to be mine. He didn't see me leave. He didn't notice the door closing behind me. Outside, the night air was damp, heavy with the smell of beer and asphalt. I tried lighting a cigarette I didn't even want, but my hands were shaking too much. The flames sputtered out. I remember thinking, so did we? A few weeks later, I got a letter from my old college. They wanted to confirm if I'd be re-enrolling for the next semester. It should have been a simple formality. But the words hit harder than I expected. Re-enroll. Begin. Continue. All words that assumed I still knew who I was. I didn't. I'd traded classrooms for late-night shifts, textbooks for grocery bills. My world had become smaller, shaped around someone else's dream. I folded the letter and tucked it in a drawer. Part of me knew I'd never open it again. That winter was brutal. The pipes froze twice. Our space heater gave out and we couldn't afford another. I'd stay late at work just to feel warm, then walk home through freezing wind, breath turning white in the air. Noah stopped waiting up for me. He was in the studio most nights working with new people, new voices. When I'd ask how it was going, he'd give me half answers, distracted, detached. Good, he'd say. Busy. That's when I started realizing I was more support system than partner. The quiet background in someone else's origin story. And even then I stayed. Because leaving would mean admitting I'd built my life around the wrong person. When he finally got that call, the one that changed everything, I thought it would feel like victory. He'd been offered an opening spot on a small regional tour. I remember the way his hands shook as he told me, voice trembling with excitement. This is it, Em. This is the start. He said it like we'd both won. But the truth was, only one of us was invited to the next chapter. He packed in silence. A suitcase. His guitar. The denim jacket I'd given him. He hugged me once too quickly, said, "You'll always be my biggest supporter." And then he was gone. The sound of the door closing felt final. It wasn't loud, but it echoed through the apartment like something breaking open. After that, the days blurred together. Work, home, silence. Repeat. His toothbrush stayed in the bathroom for weeks, like a ghost refusing to leave. I tried deleting his songs from my playlists, but every time I hit shuffle he found a way back in. People around me moved on. New jobs, new relationships, new plans. I stayed where I was, stuck in the space between who I'd been and who I thought I'd become. But eventually the numbness gave way to something else. Clarity. Not strength, not yet, but awareness. One morning I woke before sunrise and made coffee. It wasn't special, instant, bitter, cheap. But as the light came through the window, turning everything gold, I felt something small but real. Stillness. Not the heavy kind. The peaceful kind. And for the first time in a long time I realized the quiet didn't hurt anymore. That was the beginning, not of some cinematic comeback but of noticing the small ways I was still alive. The way the sun hit the countertop. The warmth of the mug in my hands. The fact that I could breathe without him. It wasn't happiness yet. But it was something close enough to build from. There's this strange moment after heartbreak. Not the crying or the denial, but the quiet that comes when you've run out of things to say about it. It's like your life goes static. Days keep happening but you're not really in them. That's how I lived for months after Noah left. Existing, not living. The apartment felt too big without him, though it was barely 400 square feet. I started noticing things I'd ignored before. The drip in the bathroom sink, the crack in the wall near the door, the faint hum of the fridge that sounded louder in the silence. It was as if the room had started speaking for the first time, and all it could say was, "He's gone." I worked, slept, repeated. A loop that dulled the ache but never erased it. Every now and then I'd check his socials. His face smiling back at me through filtered photos. Backstage moments, hotel rooms, stages flooded with light. He looked happy. Effortlessly happy. Me. I was still here. Still waiting for the version of myself that existed before him to reappear. One night I got off a late shift at the diner, my body heavy with exhaustion. It had rained and the streets were slick, reflecting red and blue lights from passing cars. As I walked home I passed a busker, a kid maybe 19, playing an old guitar under a flickering street lamp. His fingers trembled against the strings and his voice cracked mid-verse, but he kept singing anyway. Something about that sound, unpolished, vulnerable, broke me open. It reminded me of when Noah first played for me in that tiny Ohio coffee shop. The way he looked at me like music was his language and I was the first person who ever understood it. I stood there just listening, and when the kid finished I dropped the last $5 bill in my pocket into his case. He looked up, smiled shyly, said, "Thanks, ma'am." "Don't call me ma'am," I said, half laughing. "Just keep going." As I walked away something inside me shifted. Not healed, not yet, but stirred. It was the first time I'd felt connected to the world again, even for a second. A few days later I did something small but terrifying. I cleaned out the apartment. Not just the mess, the ghost. I packed his old t-shirts into a box, folded the denim jacket he left behind, deleted the drafts of songs he'd written on napkins. I thought it would feel like freedom. It didn't. It felt like grief all over again. But it was also the first time I made a choice for me. I called my landlord, told him I'd be moving out at the end of the month. I didn't have a plan. No new apartment, no job lined up beyond the diner. All I had was a need, a deep, almost primal need, to stop being surrounded by the remnants of someone else's life. I ended up finding a room in a shared house across town. It was small, barely fit my mattress and a dresser, but it was mine. My roommate, Clara, was a nursing student. Quiet, kind, the type who made soup for everyone when it got cold. On my first night there, I came home from work and found her sitting on the couch, studying with a mug of tea. She looked up and said, "You look like you've had a day." I almost told her everything right then. The years, the sacrifices, the heartbreak. But the words stayed stuck in my throat. Instead I said, "Yeah, I've had a few of those." She laughed softly. "Welcome to adulthood." It was such a simple exchange, but something about it felt grounding, being seen even in that small, passing way. Over the next few months, I built a life that didn't look like much on the outside. I started running in the mornings before work. Not because I was athletic, but because it gave me something to do that wasn't thinking. I'd run past empty storefronts, old trees with their bark peeling, the sky still bruised from dawn. And for those few minutes my head went quiet. At work I kept my head down. I didn't talk much about my past, not out of shame but because it didn't feel like mine anymore. I saved tips in a jar labeled "someday." I didn't know what "someday" meant, but having the jar made me feel like I was building toward something again. Then one night in early summer, I walked into the diner's break room to find Clara sitting there, scrolling through her phone. She looked up at me and said, "Hey, did you see this?" It was a video. Noah performing live at a festival. The crowd was massive. Thousands of people. His voice sounded different now, polished, rehearsed, bigger somehow. I felt my stomach twist. For a second it was like all the air had been sucked out of the room. That version of him, confident, untouchable, didn't even resemble the man I'd loved. Clara must have noticed the look on my face because she asked, "You okay?" And all I could manage was, "Yeah. He used to be someone I knew." It wasn't a lie. It wasn't the truth either. That night I didn't cry. I just sat on the floor of my tiny room, scrolling through old photos I'd never deleted. Us laughing in a parking lot. Him asleep on my lap. Me holding his guitar while he tuned another. And I realized something I hadn't been ready to see before. He hadn't ruined me. He'd revealed me. All that time I thought I was giving up my life for his dream. I was really just avoiding my own fear. It was easier to hide behind his purpose than face the emptiness of not having one myself. That realization didn't fix anything, but it did loosen something inside me. The guilt. The what? The illusion that he owed me something. He didn't. And for the first time I didn't want him to. A few weeks later Haley, my college roommate, called. We hadn't spoken in years. She'd seen one of Noah's interviews online and said, "You were right, Em. He really did make it." Her tone was kind, not jealous, but I could tell she didn't know what to say next. I said, "Yeah. He did." Then almost without thinking I added, I used to think that meant I failed." There was silence on the line. Then she said softly, "You didn't fail. You just bet on the wrong story for a while." That line stayed with me. I bet on the wrong story. And maybe that's what most of us do in our 20s. We place our bets too early, before we know who we are, before we understand the difference between love and dependence. Time didn't heal me the way people said it would. It wasn't some graceful process. It was awkward, uneven, full of relapses. Nights when I still missed him, mornings when I felt fine, afternoons when a song on the radio cracked me open again. But slowly I started seeing myself differently. Not as the girl who quit school for someone, but as the woman who survived what that cost her. I started writing again, not music, not essays, just fragments. Lines on napkins, receipts, old envelopes. Little thoughts like, "You can't rebuild the past, but you can repaint the silence." Or, "Not every loss is a wound. Some are directions." It wasn't art. It wasn't even good. But it was mine. One day, Clara left her laptop open on the kitchen table. I saw a half-finished application for a nursing program. She'd been putting it off for months. I joked, "You should just hit submit." She looked up and said, "Yeah? Then you should go back to school." The words hit harder than I expected. I hadn't thought about college in years. It felt like a past life. But that night I pulled out my old email, opened the same message I'd ignored long ago and reread it. The one that said, "You can reapply anytime." I didn't decide anything right then. I just stared at it, heart racing like I was staring at a door I'd closed on myself. That summer I started saving with intention. More shifts. Fewer takeouts. No more spending on things that didn't feed me, emotionally or otherwise. It wasn't about erasing the past anymore. It was about proving to myself that I could build something even from scratch. Some nights I'd still scroll past Noah's posts. But now, instead of pain, I felt distance, like watching an old movie where you recognize yourself but don't belong there anymore. His songs still played on the radio sometimes, but his voice no longer carried the same power over me. It was just sound now. And I was just me. By the time fall rolled around, the world felt softer. Not better, just softer. The air carried that crisp early autumn smell, and the trees along my running path turned amber and gold. I'd run with my headphones in, listening not to his songs but to podcasts, audiobooks, silence, anything that felt like forward motion. One morning I stopped mid-run, bent over to catch my breath and just smiled. No reason. No audience. No performance. Just because I was still here. That used to feel like nothing. Now it felt like everything. I remember the night everything finally stopped spinning. Not in a cinematic way. There wasn't a breakthrough or an epiphany or any kind of divine light. It was just quiet. Too quiet maybe. The kind that presses on your ears until you realize the only sound left is your own breathing. It had been 8 months since Daniel left. I'd gone back to my hometown in Indiana to live with my mom, because rent in the city wasn't something I could manage anymore. The first few weeks back felt like regression, like I'd undone every step I'd taken since I was 18. My old room still had high school photos taped to the mirror, the smell of lavender detergent clinging to the sheets, and a cracked record player in the corner. It was like walking into a preserved version of someone I used to be. Someone who didn't know heartbreak yet. Most mornings I'd lie there and watch dust float in the light leaking through the blinds. I'd tell myself 5 more minutes, but what I really meant was I don't know where to start. There's something about starting over that feels impossible when you don't know who you are anymore. I wasn't Daniel's girlfriend. I wasn't a college student. I wasn't anything that fit into a clean sentence. One day Mom left a note on the counter. "There's a position open at the library, part-time. Maybe check it out." I remember standing there with my coffee going cold, reading her handwriting over and over. It wasn't glamorous, but something about the idea of being surrounded by quiet again felt right. I applied. Got it. And for the first time in months I had somewhere to be. The library smelled like old paper and lemon cleaner. The floors creaked. Every day at 10 a.m. Mrs. Allen, one of the regulars, came in with a tote bag full of return novels and a smile that somehow always reached her eyes. We'd talk about the weather, about the garden she was tending to, about the books she loved. She never asked about me and I didn't offer much. But those small exchanges, they stitched something back together in me. Fully. Healing didn't happen like a sunrise. It happened like a flickering bulb. On, off, on again. Some days I could laugh. Other days I'd be shelving returns and see a book about chasing dreams and feel my throat tighten. And then one afternoon Daniel called. The screen lit up with his name and for a second I was 20 again. Heart racing, palms sweating, the world tilting toward him. But this time I let it ring. I watched his name fade away and when it finally disappeared I exhaled. Not with anger. Not with relief. Just clarity. Strange, the things that stay with you. Like how he used to hum when he cooked, or how he'd always double knot his sneakers. I don't hate him anymore. But I can't pretend he didn't carve something out of me either. There's an emptiness that comes with giving your all to someone who only saw it as convenience. Still, I've learned to live with that emptiness, to fill it with things that are my own. On weekends I started painting again, messy strokes on cheap canvas. Nothing good. But it felt like breathing again. I signed up for night classes, this time for something I actually cared about. Graphic design. And it's funny. The first time I opened a blank screen, I felt a flicker of the girl I'd been before everything fell apart. Not naive. Not lost. Just becoming. I won't lie. Some nights I still scroll through old photos. Sometimes I wonder if he ever thinks about me. But I don't linger. Because I've realized closure doesn't come from the person who hurt you. It comes from deciding their absence isn't the end of your story. A few months ago, I ran into Mrs. Allen again at a farmer's market. She said, "You look lighter." I laughed, said something about sunlight and fresh peaches, but she just nodded like she knew it wasn't the fruit. Maybe she did. Because lightness doesn't come from forgetting. It comes from carrying what broke you with gentleness instead of shame. From realizing you can love someone deeply, lose them completely, and still, wake up one morning with enough courage to keep going. I used to think I ruined my life by quitting school for Daniel. But now, when I think about that girl I was wide-eyed, believing in someone so much she risked everything, I don't see a fool. I see someone who loved fearlessly. Someone who gave and got hurt and somehow kept her heart beating. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's what resilience really looks like. Not the glossy kind people post online, but the quiet, unremarkable kind. The kind that looks like getting up early, making coffee, opening the blinds, and letting the light in, even when it hurts. Because it does hurt. Sometimes it still does. But the difference now is, I don't close the blinds anymore. I leave them open. Just in case the light decides to stay.